Good evening, class. Today I'd like to provide some thoughts and a basic outline of some of the sections on Hume's work and inquiry concerning human understanding. So, in an inquiry concerning human understanding, Hume articulates two what he calls species of philosophy. One species views the human as an active being, and the other views the human as a rational being. Both of these species have different approaches to establishing and cultivating virtue. Hume finds that a more convincing and thorough approach to begin to grasp the nature of the human being would be to inquire of the very nature of human understanding itself, and that's how he begins his project. So this is section 1. In section 2, which he entitles The Origin of Ideas, Hume divides thoughts into ideas and impressions and claims that the former is based on the latter. Hume asserts that all ideas are mixtures of impressions and creative faculties of the mind. It is here that Hume explains that the idea of God is one such idea, claiming that the idea of God arises from a reflection on our own mind, while augmenting or enlarging the powers of our mind such that it is without limit. Hume also finds this claim bolstered by the fact that individuals lacking particular senses also lack corresponding ideas related to those senses. In this sense, the idea of God is a complex idea, one based off of the human mind, but also one conjoined with infinite qualities, whereas in the human mind, such qualities are finite in nature. And so, ending the second section, Hume has made serious challenges to other concepts of God. If we think back to Descartes' meditations, particularly the third meditation, we have the concept of God um, leading to an ontological argument for the existence of God. And here Hume has provided a different explanation for how the concept of God comes into being. It comes into being first by impressions, which are what ideas are based on. And from the impression of our own human mind, we then sort of elaborate that or augment it using our creativity or imagination to imagine a mind like ours, but with infinite qualities as opposed to finite. Descartes, again, has already compared the human mind to the divine mind, and he found one of those infinite qualities in both to be the human will. Both the human will and the divine will are infinite. So this is interesting. If we remove the ontological argument, or if we find that Hume's argument for the concept of God is better than Descartes', then what happens to Descartes' system? What happens to all of the former doubts? Do they just come rushing back in again? So after elaborating in section 3 on how he being Hume, finds all ideas to be connected to other ideas through the principles of resemblance, contiguity, or cause and effect, Hume divides human reasoning into two different kinds: truths of reason and matter of fact. So he sees all human thought as being connected by three principles, those being resemblance, contiguity, or cause and effect. And what this basically means, if you think of any thought in your head, it or it arose from a prior thought, which it either resembled, was next to in some way, or had some cause and effect relationship. So if I look at, say, a pen, and so now I'm thinking of this pen, I might think, oh, a pen writes on paper. So now I'm thinking of paper. There's a certain cause and effect relationship. You could also then think of, say, a pencil, right? Because it's similar or it can resemble a pen. You could think of contiguity. What is the pen next to? Well, the pen is next to a phone. Now I'm thinking of a phone. And so all thoughts follow other thoughts, either through the principles of resemblance, a certain thought resembles another thought, contiguity, a certain thought or object something being thought about is next to another thought. So if I think of a particular car outside, then I can think of the car next to it. So I'm thinking of the car next to it, or I can think of the car that looks like it. Or I can think of some cause and effect. Now I can think if I get in the car, I can drive somewhere. And so in one sense, all of our thoughts can be traced back by prior thoughts that either resembled the ideas, were contiguous or next to those ideas, or had some type of cause and effect relationship. Concerning the latter, cause and effect, Hume claims that all matters of fact are based on relations of cause and effect, but that cause and effect is itself inferred from the supposition that the future will be like the past. This is induction. Induction says that the future will be like the past, which Hume finds, though, is circular because the aforementioned supposition is itself based only on experience. So induction, the knowledge that the future will be like the past, is itself um, based on induction, based on the experience that the future was like the past. And so the principle of induction that we use to justify that the future will be like the past is itself based on the principle that the future was like the past. So if we think of anything that's cause and effect relationship, if we take water and subject it to a sufficiently cold temperature, the water will turn to ice. Now, how do we know the water will turn to ice? Well, you could say, well, it's scientific that the water turns to ice. But scientific knowledge is just a form of inductive knowledge. People made observations and observed at what temperature water turns to ice. And then after that happened over a series of history, people say with relative assurity, water at a certain temperature turns to ice. In the fifth section of An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, Hume concludes that we have confidence in matters of fact based on cause and effect merely from custom and habit. Hume then addresses the concept of probability and explains how he understands it to relate to empirical experience and the belief that one can derive from it. He articulates belief through the paradigm of probability, first articulating the probability of chance and the example of a die, explaining that the probability of an event occurring if a die had 1,000 sides and 999 of them were labeled with the image 1, whereas only one of them were labeled with the image 2, the probability is much greater that the image 1 will be the result of the die throw as opposed to the image 2. And he believes that this is the proper way to understand the cause and effect relationship given our problem of induction. So again, if we take the problem or the knowledge statement of cause and effect that water, when subjected to a certain temperature, will turn to ice, this, he says, is probability. And so the knowledge we have is probable knowledge that it will turn to ice the next time you subject it to the cold temperature. But it's a very high probability. You take all of your empirical experiences when you've seen water turn to ice, and all of those are evidence, right? Those are the number ones on the die. You have all these times when sort of like at first you said, will water turn to ice? I've never seen it. I never know. Let's flip a coin or a die, so to speak, a two-sided die, which is more conventionally symbolized as a coin. And it's heads it does, tails it doesn't. Oh, it landed on heads. That means it did. So next time, will water turn to ice? You flip the coin, and it does again. And so you sort of think, oh, it really does. But the next time you roll the thousand-sided die, there's still that possibility after 999 experiences of water turning to ice that it won't anymore. It could change into anything. Really, hypothetically speaking, we don't necessarily think like this, but this is the problem of induction manifested. Why do we say with certainty, or at least with we claim that it's knowledge that water turns into ice at a certain temperature. Well, he would say, he being Hume, that that's a probabilistic claim. It's just such a high probability that it becomes what we might call justified true belief or knowledge. Hume then proceeds to show the inadequacy or partiality slash arbitrariness that some have demonstrated in assigning a supreme deity to the causal connection we consistently observe between objects of cause and effect, or between the will of the mind and the actions of the body. So this particularly with the latter, the will of the mind or the actions of the body, if we assume that the mind is some substance wholly different from the body, then we might ask, well, how do they interact? And then we might posit, well, there's a supreme deity that knows what the mind wills. So at this moment, I will that I raise my hand. And that supreme deity realizes that and then also allows my hand to move in sort of a perfect coordination. And this would be a way of sort of fulfilling the causal connection between a mind willing something and the body obeying that. But Hume finds that this supposed explanation does not provide us with any further information concerning how um, we can be certain that objects in conjunction have any connection, nor does this explanation provide us with an example showing the necessity of the existence of a supreme deity. So he's dissatisfied with this argument. He says again, whatever epistemological doubt we have about it, the deity, a supreme deity in control of everything, uh, sort of raises more questions than it answers, is unsatisfactory because we have no certainty of it, and much less do we not have certainty of it. But it does not show that the deity exists. So others at the time were claiming, well, this shows that deity exists because there is a causal relation between my mind and my body. And Hume is skeptical about the causal relationship between the mind and the body, and he says that this does not show adequate proof for the supreme deity. After demonstrating through argument that positing a supreme deity cannot provide us any greater knowledge with respect to our understanding of necessary connections, Hume explores the problem of liberty and necessity. And toward the latter half of this discussion, um, he finds difficulty in not attributing all authorship of every event to a creator deity, whether such an event in a long chain of prior events be positive or negative, good or evil, if one posits the existence of a creator deity. And so what he's saying here is, if we suppose that all events are predetermined by prior events, but that God is the author of all events, then by God creating this first event, God would, in a sense, be the author of all events. Because given that first event that God created, all events that there followed um, would be attributed to God, and the agents that thought that they were creating the events would themselves just be caused by that first event. And therefore, you ask, well, is an individual responsible for anything um, if God created the first event, which brought all the other causes into being? And Hume doubts that the individual would. So after he discusses this in relation to freedom and necessity, if we have this creator God that created all things and all the initial events that then therefore created the other events to which we may introspectively assume authorship for, are we really in control of those events, or were their causes God? Then Hume briefly discusses animal reasoning, in which he provides an analogy to human reason. This is just a brief part in the inquiry. Um, After he does this, he provides an analysis on miracles, which he defines as a violation of the law of nature. Hume asserts that in all cases, the probability of a miracle occurring is less probable than the testimony of an individual um, who said that a miracle occurred, and whether the individual is actually believing that the miracle occurred, or whether they're purposely deceiving. And so one cannot assume anything based on evidence of miracles, right? So this is in particular reference to, say, the Christian religion. Uh, and Hume will say something, if a religion is founded on miracles, um, then one has to question the foundation. And so this again, if one is having a faith in divine via reason, as opposed to or sorry, not faith in divine, but if one is trying to reason the existence of the divine through a belief in miracles via testimony, Hume does not think one can do this. So again, we're looking back into concepts of God, and Hume finds that the likelihood or the probability of a miracle occurring will always be less than the probability that it didn't. And therefore, religions based on miracles are subscribed to by believers through faith as opposed to reason in his argument. So we will stop there. I outlined quite a bit of it, particularly the analysis on um, various ways that we can approach the human understanding, and then what it means for freedom and for certainty. So those would be two things that we can reflect on um, through the inquiry concerning human understanding. I hope this was helpful.